Hello again. So this time I'm going to introduce you guys to the new implementations I made on the workflow on this expanded workflow for version 7. So this is a big update because I actually introduced Flux, LoRA, Tools, Dev, and Canny. And you guys will see that there's a change log now. This is all the new things on the version 7. So it's quite a lot of big and small things. I decided to log everything here, and this is going to be on all the future workflows versions. So first, let me just show you guys how the Alimama works differently and why I'm kind of inclined to actually use more of it. Okay, so let me show you a big comparison here. Some examples comparing how DevFill and Alimama works differently and why I'm kind of inclined to actually use more of Alimama, especially now with depth map control with Flux Tools. So first of all, let me talk about my reference image and the mask. So this is my reference image, and this is the mask. I try to leave the hands because I didn't want to end up with bad hands. So the hands are not inpainted, and also the purse is not inpainted. So this is a good opportunity to talk about how inpainting control works and how other control networks. So when you're using Alimama or DevFill Inpainting, it is actually using the reference image pixels to fill your mask to understand how it should control the generation. So it uses the non-inpainted area as reference for control. It also uses the prompt. The prompt is really important. So it uses two ways of controlling your final generation. With normal dev, when you use another tool like a control net or the Flux tools like LoRA depth or Canny, which my workflow uses. So when you do that, you are entering with another layer of control. So you have the images as control, you have the prompt, and you also have the depth map. You can't use Flux Tools, depth LoRA with DevFill. So you see how it actually blends well. It actually uses the background, the hand as reference, and it actually creates a nice composed image. But you can actually see that his pose is not really the same. Look at his legs here. You see especially these ones here. And look at Alimama plus depth, how it is perfectly aligned with the reference pose because it's using his body, his whole body as reference, right? It has a depth map that uses that as a way of controlling the image, while DevFill doesn't have that. So it's just using the pixels around here, the hand, the other hand, the bag, and the background to fill the image in a cohesive way. So it actually has less control, right? You can see the difference. So this is all pretty much the same pose as the reference, while this has some deviations. Right. Okay. So now that I explained this, let's talk about the comparison here. This column here, it actually uses cache, first block cache plus 4 LoRAs. And you can see that it has fares LoRA, my character, LoRA, the actor. So it's changing his face. Even DevFill actually changes his face a little bit. Can you see? It actually looks a little bit like fares, but it's not good. I mean, if you compare it here, the Alimama plus depth is pretty much perfect. His face resemblance is perfect. The DevFill tries, but it's not perfect. And then there's other LoRAs here as well to control the shirt and other stuff like that. So you can use LoRAs with DevFill, but it's not good. It barely changes anything. It has a minimum impact. So this is another point for Alimama. You can use LoRAs with it. So let's see the difference here. This one uses cache speed up. This is with cache speed up plus negatives, the thresholding negative hack. So you can see there's already a jump in quality with negatives. And the Alimama also has a little bit of a jump in quality, but not that much. But you can see how his tattoo is more defined and the shirt buttons are more defined. So negatives does work and it does increase quality and it is especially good for DevFill. So let's jump to the third column. Here I'm not using cache. So I removed the first block cache and it is using negatives. So you see there's a big jump in quality for DevFill. DevFill is really way better here. The image is more cohesive. The quality is simply better. And with Alimama also there is a jump in quality. You can see everything's more defined. The tattoos and his body and his details are a little bit better. So using catch has an impact in quality, but I wanted to point out how it is a big impact for dev fill. Dev fill doesn't really like first block catch. So you should not use first block catch with dev fill unless you're using negatives, because then you can have some kind of control even with catch. But I don't recommend it. But with Alimama, it's actually not that bad. I mean, you can use catch and get an okay image. You can just use negatives and get a quite good image. Or you use negatives and don't use catch and you get a pretty good image now. This one here is just for control. I mean, this is with no LoRAs, just to check this is not a problem with my LoRAs used here. Without the LoRAs, you can see that with negatives and no cache, the image quality is quite okay with DevFill, but it's nowhere near the quality I get with Alimama plus the depth map, right? So, yeah, I wanted to show you guys this. A comparison of DevFill with Alimama plus the depth control with Flux Tools. But also, I wanted to point out that this comparison is not really fair with DevFill, because DevFill is actually good with other things. I mean, DevFill is really way better than Alimama if you're just going to paint like an object. Let's say I just want to remove his purse. So DevFill is going to be better than Alimama with that. And DevFill is actually way better than Alimama for outpainting. So if I'm going to outpaint the image, I mostly use DevFill. But Alimama is not that bad, especially with depth control. It does work with outpainting. So this is not a really great comparison because Phil has other qualities. So let's show another example here. Let's see another practical example without painting. Let's see Joe here, where I left his face and I'm painting his shirt as well. This is pretty good. It is using depth, preserving the face, doing an outpainting, and also in painting his shirt. So this is outpainting plus in painting using the depth map. So you can see this is the mask, right? So it's pretty good. So let's move on to the next example. This one is using depth, but in painting the whole character. So I'm not leaving the face anymore, not even the hand. So it's in painting everything but the background, and the outpainted as well with Alimama plus depth. So you can see it changes the whole character. It's pretty good. The pose is pretty much the same. So the depth map works really well to preserve the character. This is a really nice image. You see, it's pretty much preserving the pose. So Alimama is not that bad without painting, but Fluxfill is better. But Fluxfill can use depth. So you have to choose. Maybe you can first outpaint and then you inpaint. That's a good option. But the problem with that is that you need to reboot ComfyUI every time I have to change models. But I don't know. Maybe that's just my problem with my machine. So let's go to the next example. This one is actually with Joe and without the depth map. So you guys can see how in painting the whole character, leaving the background and outpainting works without the depth map. This is pretty much how the workflow worked until version 6.5. You see, it's a good in painting. The character is blending well, and outpainting works as well. But the character pose is completely changed, and the perspective is different. So you see how powerful inpainting with Flux Tools can be. When you're doing inpainting, you can actually control the pose. And without that, you get a completely new pose. So this is another example. This is the last example with Joe. Let's now go with John. So John here is holding this dog, and I'm trying to inpaint him to hold a baby dragon. So first of all, I'm showing how the result would be without anything, without inpainting and without any dev control, any Flux tool control. This is just using the normal model, the normal Flux dev model. So you see, this is really bad because it tries to create a whole new image with my prompt, and then it tries to blend inside the mask I made. You see, but it's really bad. So this is not using inpainting. I bypassed inpainting. This is also not using any of the Flux tools. You see, this is turned off. So of course, this is bad, right? But you can see how inpainting has a big impact on the image. So let's move on to the next one. This one is actually using Alimama inpainting, just Alimama inpainting without Flux tools, without depth or Canny or anything like that. So you see it tries to paint the dragon. It's not bad, blends well, way much better than this. But it's not really that good. Maybe changing the seed or playing with the mask could get some good results. But let's move on to the one where I actually use Canny. So this one is using Canny, You see, this is the Canny map, and the Canny is going to help with the structure. And you can see that the dragon is like way better now. I think that's because Canny actually showed that it should have a lot of details in the head and some details here. So it actually guided the generation to get a little bit better. It's not perfect, but it's way better. So this is using Alimama Inpainting plus Canny with Flux Tools, right? So this is with two ways of controlling the image. This is John with Canny. The first thing I'm going to show you guys is actually the new LoRA section, the new LoRA groups. So I decided to go with the LoRA stacker from LoRA Manager because LoRA Manager is a really nice, really good custom node that you guys should use. So I'm going to force you guys to install it because this is really nice to use. And so I changed the LoRA stacker to LoRA Manager. So you should input your LoRAs here. To use LoRA Manager, you can just click on this button here and it's going to show all your LoRAs here. So this, for example, is just some LoRAs. You can click to copy the LoRA syntax and just paste it here. And it's going to show your LoRA here. So you can change the strength and you can add as many LoRAs as you want. And there's two stackers here, so it's more convenient. But you can, of course, add more stackers if you want. And it doesn't matter, okay? So there's this new LoRA stacker. And there's this new section to load the Flux Tools depth LoRA, control LoRA, and Canny LoRA. This should always be loaded at all the time, so you guys need to put your LoRAs here. The path can change, so you need to do it manually, probably. And you always leave this on. You don't need to change this. You don't need to worry about this. Even if you don't want to use them, the workflow is not going to use them if you select to not use them. So there's this new toggle here on the control room where you select if you want to use depth or Canny. You can't use both. You need to choose one or the other. You can use none, of course. And one important thing is you cannot use this with Flux Fill. You don't need to worry about it because if you're going to use Flux Fill and you leave this on the workflow, it's not going to use it, but it's not going to do anything to Flux Fill because it doesn't work with Flux Fill. I've actually tried. I thought the effect was going to be like not significant, but actually it doesn't even work. So if you're going to use Flux, this needs to be used with Alimama Inpainting. So this is just for Alimama. So you need to have this option here at 1 or 2. So it works with ControlNet, with Alimama ControlNet. You don't need to change anything. Just load everything here, and you can play with the LoRA strength. I'm going to explain this later, but you can change the strength here. I recommend you leave it at 0.75 because this has a nice effect, but you can increase it or decrease it, the LoRA strength. This is it. I already showed you guys the toggle. Let's go with now let's explain the implementation. This new group here. I actually need to name it, but this is the group where you have to make some choices here. This is where you control the start and the end of the conditioning of the control or of the Flux tool hours. So let's say you want to use depth control LoRA only on the beginning to get the structure of the image. And then you want to release that control and fall back to the normal inpainting. So this is how you do it. You choose the start and you choose how it should end. I normally like 0.28, but you can increase it to 0.5 or you can just do it on the whole generation. You can do that as well. But I've been experimenting and I actually really, really like to use it at just the beginning. This is for depth. For Canny, it's a little bit different. Canny is a little worse, actually. I like depth more. So this is it. So you can actually control the start and the end of the conditioning. So there's another detail here. This won't actually remove the LoRA after. Let's say you use it on half the generation. After half the generation, this is not going to remove the LoRA. This is just going to remove the LoRA conditioning. So what does that mean? It means that if you actually leave this LoRA with a really high strength, it's actually going to affect the image even after you remove the conditioning. So 0.5 after half the generation is not going to have the control effect, but the LoRA is going to affect the generation. Because if you leave this LoRA at a really high strength, it actually damages the quality of your image. So this is why I recommend the 0.75. There is actually some ways to remove LoRAs during generation, but it doesn't work with the control LoRAs, with the Flux tool LoRAs. There is the hook, the official implementation of the hooks from ComfyUI, and it doesn't work with depth or Canny. It works with any other LoRAs. You can actually just use a LoRA until, let's say, half the generation and remove it, but you can't do that with depth and Canny. I don't know if that's a bug or anything like that, but you can remove the conditioning. I actually managed to do this. So it starts with the conditioning of both of depth and Canny, or Canny with Inpainting. So this is what is a little bit different from my implementation compared with other workflows. With Flux Tools, because this is actually uses Inpainting, painting with depth and Canny. And this is way better than just using the LoRA control, the depth or the Canny alone, or just using both, because you can control them to stop. So you get a better quality of the image. Because if you use a lot of control nets together, you actually get a hit on quality. So I actually like the idea to lose the control a little bit after the beginning of the generation, after you get the main structure of your image. So this is it. So you control this for both Canny or depth here. And there's actually the Flux guidance. I don't know if it's the official recommendation, but it control LoRAs or Flux tool LoRAs, it's supposed to work better with 10 guidance. Or like 30 guidance, the same way that Flux Fill likes 30 guidance. This won't work well. This won't blend well in an inpainting generation. So I don't recommend you use 30 Flux guidance for inpainting with Alimama, because this is not going to look good. Maybe this might be good for the whole image. So that's why the option is here. Maybe you want to inpaint the whole image, which is barely inpainting. If you use that, but it actually does work, and maybe you want to use a higher guidance because it's a recommended guidance. But I recommend using the same guidance that you are using here, or maybe just a little deviation, but not too much, because you're going to have a bad blending with color and saturation if you actually increase this. That's my experience anyway. So the option is here to increase conditioning only for the LoRA. So if you change it here, your conditioning for the Alimama control net is still going to be the one you chose there on the control panel. But this is going to change only for the LoRA. Actually, it's going to change for both, because until this stops working, this conditioning is going to be used for both Alimama and the control Flux tools. So after that, it falls back to the original Flux guidance you chose on the control panel. So it first uses this until the generation stops, the conditioning stops, and it falls back to the old conditioning, the normal inpainting conditioned, the default conditioning. So there is this thing to show you guys. Here's actually this new group here as well. They are actually to pre-process the image to actually be fed to the instruct pix to pix conditioning. This is the node that actually makes the Flux tool LoRAs work. It needs to have an image. It needs to be preprocessed for depth or Canny. So this is done here. This is the part that it actually checks if you are using one or the other. You can't use both, but you can use none, and it actually does some calculations here. Actually, the depth preprocessor image uses a little bit of a complex outpainting, complex pad for outpainting. Instead of just doing a black border or a white border, it actually expands the depth map to actually be more useful on the outpainting. You don't normally want to outpaint with the Alimama, but this is here because it works. It sometimes gives some nice images without painting. So for depth, there's this. It actually outpaints the depth preprocessor image, and the Canny actually just fills it with a black border, because I think that's better than just expanding with the fast fill option. Anyway, maybe I'll show this to you guys when I'm doing some examples. So this is the new group that I needed to show you guys. Works with a localized area in painting as well. So there's this new group here that will pre-process the image to use depth or Canny on the localized area in painting as well. The localized area and painting crop. So this is a new thing as well. I updated the node because this node was recently updated. There's the old Inpainting crop node, and this is the new Inpainting crop improved. So I changed it. It's working pretty much the same way it was working before. There's not much improvement from my workflow specifically, but I updated it. Now there's a bunch of other smaller updates. For example, this is one small update that I changed this. What else? I actually fixed the problem that the grow mask here with 5 that I talked about in the comments on the CV type page, that this needs to be connected to the fill mask area here, and it wasn't connected on the old version. So this is fixed. And actually there is a slider. This was already introduced on the 6.5 workflow, where you can choose to do more blur and more feathering on the outpainting mask to actually blend better. Because sometimes outpainting really is not really good, and you need to do this to be more seamless. I already explained this on this node here. Anyway, so there's this slider here, and I actually changed this to a slider as well, to the aura and the blur on the aura mask. So you actually can use this. So this is the small things. There's some small changes as well. It actually is going to check if you're going to use negative to actually save that on the final image here. I don't know why this is doing this. I think this needs to be fixed. This is going to evaluate if you are using negatives, and it will only save if you are. Or you can use the negatives from your previously original image if you load it here. So basically this is it. I actually wanted to show some examples because the implementation is this, but this is really powerful actually. This is a really big change, and this makes quite a difference on your Inpainting. So now I'm going to show some more examples. So this one is from Fair's image I have, where he is in the ground. So I'm going to try to Inpaint him as an angel with some big wings around his back. So I made a mask to actually change the full background. So this is actually using Canny till 30 of the generation. So this is using the Canny map. You can see here, and this is the result. You can see that the wings actually formed well, and what I want to show with this example is actually that Canny actually, the black areas in Canny, doesn't really, it's not really much of a problem to generate stuff in it where the black area is, or where the black image of the processor control is. So you can see that it's black, but the wings actually formed well. Well, if you use depth, it's the next example, using depth map, you can see that it actually hinders the generation. You can see that when you're seeing the image getting formed, here on the K-sampler, you can actually see that while the Flux tool, the LoRA is working. While it is controlling the image to like 30, there's actually no wings at all because it actually follows the depth map too closely. So you see the depth map here is completely black. There's no hint of anything close to the camera. So it actually just try to generate fares on the ground so there's no wings until like 30 of the generation, where the control with depth map falls off to only Inpainting, and then it starts to generate the wings. So you get this bad, small, barely formed wing. So you can see that depth is not always the best choice. And you can simply choose to not use anything at all. Sometimes you can simply not use it, and the image is sometimes going to be better. So you see, this is just with Inpainting, just Inpainting the background with Alimama. Alimama is really good with Inpainting the background and keeping the character. I've tried this with Flux Fill, and Flux Fill creates like a really bland image sometimes, so this is way better. So this works better than using depth or Canny. So you have to actually analyze what you want. Sometimes you don't want a second way of controlling the image. Sometimes just Inpainting is enough, right? So that's it. So this is another example that I think this was kind of nice to show. And another example here, I'm going to Inpaint Fair's now. His whole body, so his whole character, and leave the background. And I'm going to use a LoRA of Paul Mescal. So just to change the character, let's say I want to change the person. Okay, actually this is Paul Mescal without Inpainting. So I'm not using Alimama in Painting. This is just using Flux Tools LoRA with depth. So sometimes the image actually works really well if you just use depth, because depth is a little bit of a way to control the image as well. So it will blend well because I'm inpainting the character and the Flux tool is showing where the character should be. So it's almost the same effect of using inpainting. So using just the depth LoRA actually works well here. And the advantage of using only the depth LoRA here is that I can increase the guidance to the recommended value to 30 or 10 or something in between. So you have this, and the image going to have some better colors, and maybe the depth map will work better. So that's an option as well. That's it. I wanted to show you that you have the option to actually not use Inpainting as well. You can just bypass this node here, and you can just use the Flux tool to depth or Canny and also control where it's starting, where it ends. And just so we can finish with another example here, I'm going to inpaint this image where we have Fairs as a Nordic character holding a spear. So let me show you the image here. So you see I'm inpainting everything but his face. So I'm leaving his face and I'm painting his whole body. So I'm changing his cloth basically, but the prompt also says he's holding a spear and a shield. So this is the result with inpainting without any other control LoRAs. Without any other Flux control LoRAs, so this is not using that, and you can see that the pose changes. Right here, the pose changes completely. He did blend really well. The clothes changed well. This is actually good inpainting, but the pose is completely different. His body structure is different, so this is just with inpainting. So let's move on where I actually use inpainting with a depth map. So let's see the depth map here. So this is the path map. You can see that this will control quite well his body structure. You see he's like a strong man, and his pose is pretty much the same as the reference image. And the shield is the same, the spear is the same, so this is quite good. You see how powerful this can be to control in painting. But there's some problems. For example, he has a cape, and I want to remove the cape. So because of the depth map, it tries to create something here, probably related to my prompt about long hair or something like that. So he creates this weird hair below his shield. But this can be fixed if you want to play with some LoRA strength and with some parameters. What you can do is this. You can actually come here on the LoRA. Let's use the bookmarks here. I barely use them, but there's some bookmarks here to help you navigate the workflow. So I'm using my tank top shirt LoRA here, and I decrease the depth LoRA strength to 0.6. Normally it is at 0.75, and I decreased it a little, and that was enough to follow his body structure and pose, while actually leaving some room to not create anything where the cape was. So you see this one here, it has his body structure. There's a little bit of more lenience here, but his hand is holding the spear in the right spot. The shield is the same size. His pose is pretty much the same, although his feet is a little bit different. His leg position is a little bit different, but it didn't create the hair here. So you have some room for experimentation and control with the LoRA strength. And also where you want to start and end the LoRA conditioning. So this is it. And you also have the option to use Canny, which works a little bit differently. Canny doesn't follow the black parts as well as depth map does. So you can actually try Canny sometimes, just because with Canny you can draw lines and try to control it like a line art control net, whereas depth map is a little bit harder. Another trick that you can use with depth map is you can actually blur this depth map, because sometimes you want to, let's say, you don't want this pants. You want him to wear shorts or wear, I don't know, a different shoe, and his clothes are showing up on the depth map. What you can do, you can actually use some high blur on the image, so it blends these contrast differences in lines, and it actually might help you to control only the depth and not the details. If that makes any sense. So my workflow doesn't have that. But you could just edit yourself here. You could go here where the depth map image is pre-processed. You could just click here and add a blur, add some node adds blur to the image, right? And then feed it back to the rest of the workflow. So I'm not going to show another example of that. This is just some more explanations, and that's it. So thank you guys. I hope this was informative and helpful in any way. If you like this, leave a comment. Also, if you need any help, leave a comment here or on Civet AI. Make sure to check the compact workflow video as well. Bye.